I live in the very coast of Mississippi. There are plenty of woods and forests. There is also a history of supernatural, witchcraft, being only an hour from New Orleans, and plenty of Native American history, which I partake in. Behind my house is a small plot of conservation land that continues on the other side of my house for about a mile wide and a few long. The conservation is for Native American burial sites, or that's what the speculation is. There are some evidence of graves though, and a wildlife conservation. All of our neighbors have a fence protecting us from whatever is in the woods. I didn't really think much of it because we are in the South and foxes are prevalent. We have a coop of chickens about 500 feet from the forest line that is fenced in. About a month of living there, chickens began to be found dead. Not all of them were really eaten as much as shredded. We have had a couple of calls from people in charge of the conservation site to let us know that there were sightings of large animals, probably large foxes as they said. But I never really thought much of it because these things do happen. However, one night I woke up at about 3 or 4 a.m. and went to the kitchen to get a drink. Our kitchen has a sliding glass door leading to a porch area that overlooks our backyard, the forest line, and the chicken coop. I used my flashlight to get to the kitchen because I didn't want to wake anyone up in the house. As I walked by the sliding glass door, the light caught the reflection in the door, but also 2 yellowish dots. They looked pretty small, so I figured it was probably the fox trying to get to our chickens. Foxes are typically pretty skittish and are easily startled, so I decided to bang on the glass door, scared off. I banged on the glass door, the eyes stopped moving to the chicken coop and just froze. I didn't figure much and banged on the glass again. I figured it would run after that, but to begin inching closer. Not towards the chicken coop, but towards my house. It ducked behind your shed, and the shed porch light gave me a glimpse and I freaked out. This thing was not a fox. It was double the size and was walking really hunched over on its back legs. I grabbed the 2x4 we used to secure the sliding glass door during storms and sprinted to my room. Never really told anyone because I figured they'd think I was crazy, delusional, and that it was just one of our foxes. With all the sightings of very large foxes, I wonder if it's really even a fox anymore. I was around 10 years old when this happened. It was the middle of summer, and our air conditioner was broke at the time. So I cracked open the window to the left of my bed to let cooler air in the overheated room. I was playing my favorite game on my Super Nintendo. It was Super Mario World. I had been playing for a few hours and the sun began to set. At around 7:30 p.m., I heard something tapping on my window. I jumped, not expecting it. I walked to the window to see what it could have been, but then everything went silent. The crickets just seemed to stop chirping, the frogs stopped croaking, even the wind seemed to quit blowing. I suddenly had a strong feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. I quickly closed my window and locked it. There it was again, the tapping on my window. It was pretty much completely dark outside by now, and I couldn't see anything in our yard, but I felt like something or someone was watching me from the other side of my window. Suddenly, the power in the house went out, and it was then that I could see it. It was shaped kind of like a human, but it was massive, at least 9 feet tall. Its eyes were big, black and shaped like almonds. Its skin was a pale gray, and had splotches of dark brown fur on its chest and shoulders. The arms were long and thin, and they missed the ground by mere inches. Had long, skeletal fingers that ended in curved claws. The legs bent unnaturally backwards at the knee, and its mouth was turned into a wide grin filled with razor-like teeth. I was frozen. My brain told me to move, but my legs would not budge. The creature stared at me with its head cocked to the side as if it was confused. It lifted its hand and tapped on the window again. I finally made myself back away from the beast and hid in the shadowy corner. I began crying as I feared for my life. And through the tears I prayed. It then let out an ear-splitting scream and jumped up onto the roof. I could hear it clawing its way over the roof towards the other end of the house. It let out a scream and leapt away. The power seemed to come back on then, and I've never seen or heard the beast again. If you have any idea what it could have been, please let me know in the comments. I just wanted to share my personal encounter with what I believe to be a Bigfoot. I'm a truck driver and travel all over the United States, and this encounter happened in Washington. I was there to get unloaded to pick up another load. All is normal as usual. I get to my location and get unloaded, and I'm racing against time to my pickup. Somehow, I make it on time and get loaded and leave and race once more to get somewhere where I could park for my 10-hour break. I didn't win this race, so I had to pull over to a spot on the side of the road that barely could take the truck and trailer. So I settle in to get my things, and I want to get some fresh air before I lay down for the night. So I get out of the truck and walk around, calling myself, getting familiar with the area. It's late afternoon and really nice outside. There's apples and birds everywhere. The location I was in was a 2-lane road along the side of a mountain. There was a river below, and it was just beautiful. Wine country was all over the place too. So I stayed out until dark, and finally traffic did not exist, and the noise was gone, and I thought I might sleep outside here. Then I hear little pings like pebbles are being thrown at my truck and trailer. I scanned around but saw nothing. Using the full moon for light, seeing nothing there, I get uneasy and decide to go into the truck. Now, I start to hear more bings and weird-ass shrill and squawks like nothing I've ever heard before. And at this point, this loud crashing noise seemed to come from nowhere. It sounded like trees snapping. Then I see a tree limb about 15 inches round go flying by my windshield. So, I jump up because I genuinely believe someone crashed or something. When I get up, I make my way to the front and look out the driver's side window. Through the window, it stood and stared at me. This thing had a reddish fur and massively wide frame, similar to a bodybuilder's. Standing right there in front of me was something I couldn't fathom. I began to feel freaked out, thinking, what the heck is this thing? It stepped closer to the driver's side door, and it bent down looking at me, eye to eye. I was overcome with fear. Because I was thinking in my mind, this thing had to be at least 8 or even 10 feet tall. The head alone was massive and long. The face was wrinkled and leathery, and his teeth were like big yellow blocks. I just sat there and stared as it stared back at me. It had copper color eyes that I'll never forget. Then, suddenly it stood back upright. Again, its chest was level with the window. It towered over the door and started banging on the truck. It was pounding the roof of the truck, so I opened the door, and it backs away slowly and snorts loud and long. I somehow wasn't scared anymore. So I get out, and what a mistake this was. I have never, ever seen anything this big. It's like Shaq looking at Gary Coleman. Anyway, it rushes forward in a 2-step stride, and is on top of me before I can even move. You wouldn't think something this size can move that fast. Then, it just bent down. It seemingly smiled at me, grabbed me by my hair, not rough but firm, and then it seemingly just let go. It smelled its hand, turned and walked away about 15 feet. It looked back at me for a second, and then started running back into the trees. This is the weirdest experience that I cannot explain. But I do sincerely think that I encountered a Sasquatch that day. About 10 years ago, me and my best friend decided to stop by a local hangout of ours in Bowie, Maryland. We grew up here and spent our early years wandering the railroad tracks and woods, smoking and drinking as children do. So this one spot is a railroad overpass at 450 and 197. There's a parking lot and a small area of grass and trees, about 30-foot strip of land separating the tracks and the lot. So it's nighttime when we decide to go there and smoke a cigarette. We go on the tracks and we're facing the parking lot. So the overpass is to our left and the tracks go on to our right. Now we're smoking, and he's talking, but the entire time I'm focused to my right, peering down this track because I have the strangest feeling. I didn't know what it was until later, and it was the feeling of being watched by a predator. I've never really experienced this before. After about 2 minutes, we're almost done with our cigarettes. A helicopter flies right above us, seemingly at tree level, with a spotlight going right over us coming from the direction of the overpass. Not 10 seconds later, I hear the gravel shift from between the tracks, and I look forward to the overpass. Standing right in the center of the overpass, there is a giant silhouette. Now, since it is dark and it's under the overpass, I can only see its silhouette. It had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall, and burly looking. It was huge, and we only got a good look at it for a few seconds before I got creeped out and said, "Let's go." Now we hurriedly started rushing away, and we hear the gravel move closer, and not 3 seconds later we both hear the most demonic, horrifying, multiplied pitch screech we've ever heard. It was literally right behind our heads. It came from no more than a foot behind us. So of course we book it to his car. And no, we didn't look back because are you freaking kidding me? Get real. That's terrifying. I didn't want to see what made that noise, and I doubt you would want to either. We get to his car, and funny thing is, his lanyard got stuck around the steering wheel, and when we poured out, his keys poured out of the ignition as he turned the steering wheel. Anyways, we drive around for an hour. Only thing we could do is say, "What the heck?" And that's my encounter with what I think could be Goatman. Now, about a week later, we're hanging out with our friend, Andy. Now, Andy has spent a lot of time in the woods, and he was telling us about how last week the cops were out in the woods because they heard screams and thought a woman was being raped or something. Now, I asked him if they had helicopters out, and he said yes. And I asked him if it was the day that we saw this goat man. It was. So, it's pretty weird. This thing was seen by me and my friends on 2 separate occasions. I will explain the first encounter. It is a decently long one, but bear with me. My older brother, 2 friends, and I decided we were brave and ventured into my pasture. Now, I'm not in a rural area where my neighbors are super far away. I'm actually only about 20 minutes from town. Well, the oldest in our group was 12. So being dumb, we walked out into the field. Keep in mind, it was freshly diced and plowed, so there were no weeds. We were armed with a pocket knife, a big knife, and a CO2 airsoft gun. We walked out of my back gate and into the field. We saw nothing but the buildings maybe a mile in front of us. We also have coyotes out there. Well, we made it to the back of the field. A horrible smell came out of the ditch, and it kind of freaked us out, so we started to move back. But when we turned back to the field, we saw 2 figures. I know for sure they were not there 25 minutes ago. Stupidly, we shot the gun at them. They stood up on 2 legs. We panicked and we just ran inside to watch a movie and to try to forget about this. The second time is very quick. I was playing basketball late at night and I saw this thing jump from a tree. I was older. It was 2 years from that last sighting, and I was strangely not scared. I just went back into the house and went to bed. That is my story of the strange creature I saw those nights. If you know what it is, please tell me. Well, I was 11 at the time, and my mom had a new boyfriend. He happened to own a piece of land which we lived on the edge of the woods. My brother and I, who was 12 at the time, got into another fight, and when my mom took his side, I stormed out. I was angry that my mom always took his side, and since walking around the yard was the only way I knew how to let off my anger, that's what I did. But since I had just stormed out instead of thinking it out first, I didn't have any of the animals with me. I walked towards the wooded part of the yard. I kept looking behind me to make sure my brother didn't follow me to annoy me. It is important to keep in mind that the edge of the property is marked by the train tracks, which no one usually goes past. I was also a very smart kid that believed in the paranormal. I was passing back and forth when I heard my brother's voice. I froze for a second to think about what it could be and what I should do. I decided, whether it was my brother or not, it didn't matter much. But the smarter option was to run to the house, and if my brother was there, that what I heard was, in fact, something trying to hurt me. And if he wasn't there, I would know that he was just following me again. I ran fast. I have only ever ran that fast once, and that was because of a different supernatural problem I had. I made it up to the back porch and turned around, and nothing was there. Whatever it was had stopped at the tree line, which had to be at least 1/4 of a football field away. Running inside, my brother was talking to my mom at the kitchen table. I asked both of them if he went outside, and their answer made my heart race and my stomach turn no. I just walked to my room and tried to calm down. Half a year passes and I had forgotten about the whole situation. Until, that is, we started finding bones in the yard. That's not what bothered me though, because coyotes were definitely common in the area. But one day, me and my mom were walking in the yard and our dog Coda started sniffing at a pile of leaves. It turned out to be a deer leg, not bones, but its entire leg. I felt sick. It looked as if someone had ripped it off the poor animal and left it there. It's been a while, but I'm still living in the house. And lately, I've been feeling watched from those woods, and quite frankly, I'm scared of what's out there. I probably sound crazy to you, but I've seen this thing twice within a 3-month span. After that, I moved in the area. Thank God. I was 16 and had just gotten my license, and my brother sold me a sweet 1989 T-top Camaro. I was told about an old auction house out in the middle of nowhere, because I was asking around about where people hung out, which turned out to be 1 mile behind where I lived. If you want, I can send you Google Map pictures on the roads where this encounter took place. So, I went to the auction and made friends with a guy named Bob. He asked for a ride home because he was trying to hook up with the auctioneer's daughter and let his ride go home without him. So, we were staying over late after the auction. It closed about 11 p.m. and it was pitch black when we finally left. As I was going down the road the auction was on, we came to a curb that was closer to the wood line than the straight way. As we started to go into the curb, Bob screamed to stop, so I slammed on the brakes, thinking he was crazy. Then he said, under his voice, "Look to the right." As I did, I spotted a pair of glowing red eyes about 2 feet off the ground. I said, "Is that a coyote?" And Bob said the eye shine reminded him of one, but coyotes were orange, not red. I said, "Well, do you have a weapon? And do you have a coyote permit?" Which he said yes to both. It's not uncommon for people to carry concealed guns in the countryside of Kentucky. He pulled out a .22 long revolver from his coat, then stood up out of the T-top, then draws his weapon and shoots, firing all 6 rounds into the spot with the eyes. He then replies to go grab our supper jokingly. I bent over to get a flashlight out of the glove box. As I bent over, I saw the eyes again, and they had gone from 2 feet to 8 feet tall. At that point, I smashed on the gas pedal, still bent over towards the glove box, and Bob screams, "What the hell, man?" I replied, "We will come back and get it in the morning." We went back to find no blood and no dead animal. What we did find, though, was one large-looking dog footprint, and limbs broken off at about 7 feet tall, like if an 8-foot-tall human had walked through that brush. I never told anyone about this afterward. I have a lot of scary dreams these days. I figure that's due to how incredibly difficult it is to lure me outside at night. After the 3 physical encounters, let's just say my paranoia kicks in for literally no reason at all sometimes. The slightest odd feeling in my ass goes indoors, armed to the teeth with the house on lockdown. I just assume Cat God is experimenting with new tactics because of this. So anyway, time passes, and it's mostly just a little stuff for a while, and then it starts to flare up again. This thing likes to announce his presence when he starts feeling uppity. The next few stories are from one of his recent uppity moments. We were experiencing strange sounds, knocking on the floors, and feelings of being watched start to become increasingly more frequent. Then, one night I hear this very aggressive barking coming from my front yard. Dogs pass through our yard all the time. I make friends with most of them. Shoot, I make friends with pretty much all the wildlife that I come across, even the spiders and snakes. They're attracted to me for some reason. But not this dog. The first night I didn't see him. The second night I only saw his eyes. The full moon was out and the yard was very, very well lit that particular night. Of all the places the dog could be standing, it chose the darkest part of the yard. Between a huge tree and a white shack-like building where we stored junk we don't have room for in the house. The spot was basically a big-ass shadow. This was the same area the dog had been barking from the night before. So I go outside and I see the 2 bluish glowing eyes that are pretty widely spaced apart, meaning that this dog was huge. It sounded pretty damn big too. Our eyes locked and I got this very unsettling feeling. There was nothing else out there. The dog appeared to be barking at my house, and me, after I came outside, again, very aggressively. There was something really off about this dog. Assuming it was trying to lure me outside to the tree line, I fired a warning shot in the dirt a few feet from it. I never saw or heard it move, but it wasn't there after I fired. It came back the next night and barked around my side of the house near my bedroom window, but the back in the woods a little way. It snowed a few days later when we found its prints. They were almost as big as my hand if I spread my fingers apart as far as they'll go. I halfway thought it was just some abnormally large and mentally disturbed dog, so I decided not to shoot it. Not that it would have helped if it had been what I thought it was anyway. Probably would have pissed it off. A few nights later, I had a dream about a cougar that seemed to shrink and grow at random as it walked in my front yard. It was huge. It kept coming up on the porch and trying to get in my front door. At one point, it somehow got its head inside. It was bear-sized. I was sitting with my back against the door to keep it out. It wanted it badly. I shrugged this one off as just a normal dream until the next night, when I had the same exact dream. Only this time it was a man in a dark hooded cloak. He wore a mask that appeared to be carved from wood and painted white. It had markings, but I don't remember what they looked like. It vaguely resembled old masks that our people wore during certain ceremonies. He had glowing red eyes. He also seemed to grow and shrink at random. It kept trying to get through my front door. It almost looked like he was floating as he crept up onto the porch. It got maybe 4 feet from the door, and I just reacted with the first thing that crossed my mind. I started banging against the door and yelling like I'd lost my mind. I figured it might scare it away. I was very wrong. It stopped, cocked its head sideways a little, and just stared at me. This thing had to be at least 8 feet tall. It reached its hand out toward me, and I stopped dead in my tracks. The hand moved really fast, and I woke up almost immediately. I'm not really certain of what he pointed at me. I want to say it looked like a gun, but it could have just been a gloved hand. A gun was actually the last thing I would have expected, and that made it way scarier. A witch with a pistol. That was a new one for me. I don't know if this has anything to do with that creature I saw that night. Maybe it was a big wolf, an abnormally big dog, or maybe something else. This is not my story, but my cousin's. I thought people would enjoy it. This story happened to me back in the summer of 2010. I was working for a major landscaping company, and the crew I was a part of was the smallest crew, just the three of us. Our job was to prepare new locations for landscaping. We always got to go to really cool locations and pretty much do nothing all day, except small stuff, planting grass, watering trees, etc. Anyway, you get the point. We had been dispatched to a new warehouse that was being built. The grounds were absolutely massive, so we had a lot of ground to cover. We just started really early in the morning, probably 8 a.m., and the day seemed like it was going by quick. Just to note, the warehouse was in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's what it felt like. I do remember that in the distance I could see rows of massive electric power lines, maybe 300 or so yards away. And from the clear sky, around lunchtime, the other guys wanted to go grab some lunch. I had brought my own lunch, so I agreed to stay with the trailer. They took off and I began to sit against the trailer and eat my lunch. I was facing the power lines. I noticed something coming in the distance. At first it looked like a black glider, but I didn't understand why anyone would be using a glider so close to power lines. I saw this jet black glider fly over the power lines. Now this glider was maybe 100 yards away. To my shock, I noticed it was no glider, but a bird. I couldn't believe what I was seeing was a bird. The bird then took a quick U-turn and started back from where it came from. I took off towards this thing. It was of course way too fast for me to catch. It flapped its wings and took off, missing the power lines just by an inch. In my quick dash, I noticed I had dropped my old flip phone, which I was going to use to attempt to video this thing. I've seen a California condor, I've seen a crane, and turkey vulture. This was nothing even close. This thing was 10 times the size. To gather a good perspective of its size, I would guess that each power line tower was about 30 feet from each other or so, and the bird's wings would have to be at least half of that. So I would say it was maybe 22 to 24 feet. It was absolutely jet black, maybe just a little white on its neck. Its beak was long and sharp, and it had raptor-looking feet. I didn't hear it make much noise, but when it did flap its wings, it sounded like you would get when giant sails are flapping in the wind. I don't know if this was a thunderbird, but it was pretty goddamn big.